How do you know when you're ready to polish? Well, the key one for me is down here at the bottom. Did you get the okay from your supervisor? All right. This is one that is really important because typically what happens is you hit your block and you show it to the supervisor, you show it to the director, right? You will end up getting into a situation to where they'll look at it, they'll tell you to make minor changes here or there, they'll tell you to make minor tweaks or, change this bigger thing, change this, change that. And then you go in and you change it. After you change it and you show it back to the supervisor will be like, all right, okay, we're good, ready to move forward. So go ahead and start polishing, start finishing up your idea. That's when you do it. Because if you start to do the polish before the idea gets okayed, before you get the thumbs up from the supervisor or the director, you've wasted all that time. And now you have to go back behind and you have to redo everything once they make you change your idea. Okay, so that's the number one thing for me. So this one right here should be at the top. What makes a great animator? Those last extra polish time that you spend on your shot, right? It does make a major difference, right? Whenever you look at, if you were to compare film and television, right? There's not much of a comparison because film, like feature work, it's the quality is much higher. But the reason why it's much higher is because you have so much more time to polish. You have so much more time to finesse your ideas, right? So the key takeaway from here is time. So if I spent probably 30 minutes just polishing through just to get it out the door, right? It's probably not going to look anywhere near as good as if I spent like 3 hours on it, right? So if you give yourself enough time to make sure that you're following your arcs, you're making sure that you're hitting your timing properly and you're easing in and you're easing out at the right times, your work's going to look so much better, right? So it's that extra little bit of oomph added to your shot, right? And so, like you said, right, all your ideas should already be there, right? Is everything working? That ties into the okay from your supervisors, right? Because if it's not all there, if the idea is not 100% there, you're going to be missing out on good usage of time because that supervisor is going to tell you to add in more or change things. All right. So with polishing, it's super important to understand first and foremost how your polish is supposed to work. Okay. So with the slides that Tote has given me, they're very straightforward and they're really spot on. Okay. The first thing that you need to know about polishing is that everything needs to be working together. So you know how yesterday I was calling out some things in the blocking, how it was like the arm would be doing this while the hand would be doing this, right? So you need to make sure that everything's working together at the same time and everything's not feeling what we would call robotic, right? To where it would just be doing this. Okay. So that's the number one thing, right? Here he says, be careful with your IKs. He's talking about popping in particular. Okay. So if you're polishing out your walk, right? And how I was saying, like the knees need to be in line with like the feet, more or less, right? You need to pay attention to that. You need to pay attention to whether or not something's moving real fast in there and it's creating pops. Okay. The other thing to be careful with is whenever you're doing an FK IK switch. Okay, so if you have an FK where you're like doing something with the hand and it's about to hit the ground, right? You need to be careful to not. You need to be careful to make sure that you're smoothing out that transition, that it's feeling good. As far as action and reaction goes, right, for your organic movements, that's where you get into seeing things like feeling robotic, like how we were talking about at that first point, right? As opposed to swimmy, which would feel like this. Okay, that's a typical word that we use. So swimmy. When somebody says swimmy, that means that it feels real even, it feels real slow, right? Like we're not moving organically. It's moving along real swimmy. Okay. That's one of the other things that you need to keep an eye out for. And the way to fix that would be to start playing with your timing, right? Start playing with your timing and then some of your spacing, right? So when you start your polish, okay, you always want to start with the one thing that moves the most, okay? And then you slowly start to rein it in to where you're getting down to like the secondary objects. So for myself, I always start with the root, okay, which for me, I call it the cog, right? So we're talking about that big hip control that moves like the rest of the body, right? So I'll start there. I'll start at the waist to make sure that the waist is moving properly. Then from here, I'll move up to the chest because the chest affects all this upper area, right? And then from there, I'll start messing with the head and then the arms all the way down to the hands, okay? You want to work that way because if you make any fixes to the hands, right, or the head, if you're polishing all of that, and then you go all the way back down to the hips, you end up having to redo all of that work because any change on the hips might change the arc that you've done on the hands, okay, and the head. So that's why you want to work that way. So always start with the biggest and work your way down to the smallest, right? Track everything. Right. I went over this yesterday. I gave you all your little pinpoints of the stuff that you want to track whenever you're going through and you're starting to get ready to work out through your arcs. All of those little pinpoints are the things that you need to track. So make sure you remember that. When you turn on wireframe mode, you could see things behind other objects. I'm not a strong user of wireframe mode. I don't typically use it because I'm paying attention more to what's happening like in camera. And if I can't see it, I'm not too bothered by it. But if you're going to be doing cycles, this could be a strong tool for you because you'll be able to see where things are popping behind the object, right? So if I was to turn this way and I was to start doing this, right, you can't see what's happening on the other side of my body, right? Turning on wireframe is going to allow you to see how your arc's being affected from whatever camera angle you're on. So that would be one of those tools in your tool belt kind of thing. But the one thing that's kind of cool about wireframe mode is that studios actually will create specific tools that you'll use. So I'm assuming most of y'all have AnimBot that y'all are using right now, right? That is an unbelievable tool. We all use it for every studio. It's a super useful tool. And there's so many layers to it. So the wireframe mode at Sony, they had a ghosting tool that you could use to where you could see your animation. When you're on one frame, you could see the frames that's coming for, so it'll help you check your arcs and stuff. Another studio that I was at had another tool that allowed you to ghost your character in that particular frame to be able to see where things are at. And there's also another tool in Maya. I don't remember where it sits. It's not a tool, it's a button that allows you to see through your character, and it's not wireframe. So it's pretty cool. All right, that's enough about wireframe. Anyways, so spend time on the eyes and the other parts of the face. So like how I pointed out in the points, right, of all the spots that you're going to track, that is going to be one of the key areas where you're going to look at, right? So I pinpointed the nose as one of the spots. I pinpointed the chin, right, and the ears as your things that you're going to follow. One of the other ones that I didn't point out was the eyes. I don't know why I didn't point out the eyes, but the eyes. One of the main reasons why you want to look at the eyes and make sure you're tracking where the eyes are moving is because that's 100% where everybody's looking, right? Whenever you're watching something, whenever you're watching a movie or an actor, just anything, you're always drawn to the face. You're always looking at the face. So if the face kind of pops for one frame, you'll see the eyes pop as well. And the eyes will stand out pretty strong because they're two white objects dead in the middle of whatever the other color is, right? So we'll see that pop off. So you want to make sure you're tracking those as well. If your character has a face and it's not moving, it's not animating, it's going to be a little distracting. Okay, so you need to make sure that you're following that properly. Offset curves. If we have like an arm going from this position to this position, right? So like if I was to raise it up and do this, right? In one motion, right? All of this looks like it's moving together and hitting at the same time, which is one of the notes that I gave yesterday, right? So we're doing this and everything's landing at the same time. If you offset the curves, basically you would get a more natural flow, right? You would get a more natural flow as the object is moving through the environment. So when you do that, if you were to take like the elbow control and offset that as the shoulder's coming up, it's going to give you a more natural flow. Okay, it's going to give you a more natural flow. But the only thing that you need to be wary of is when you do that, when you offset that curve, it's not going to be perfect. So you would still need to go in and kind of finesse like you're overshooting your settle, right? After you reach that final position. So it's not just shift the curve and you're done. Okay. But if your curves are all landing at the same point, everything's going to feel robotic.